What we want to cover today are the basics of the types of associate doctors, the basic components of a associate doctor contract, because they're different. There's no such thing as just a generic contract. Now, if it was the same doctor, if you were going to use the same business model for the associate doctor, you could use the same contract, but there would still be differences in the benefits or possibly the responsibilities, maybe more so the benefits. So here's what we want to do is first, let's be aware of the types of associate doctors there are, because each one of these will be a different type of contract. Okay. So here's the 7 types of associate doctors. Now, it's going to depend on these factors. So remember the top 5 factors that we always look at. Number 1 is personality. That's huge, whether the person will have the natural ability to do what it takes for a particular role or responsibility. That's huge. That's if you miss that, you've almost missed everything. And then motivation, we pay attention to and again, I go into detail in all of these in my associate doctor series. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into this right now. Okay. So the main factors we're going to pay attention to is personality, motivation, conviction. Those are the big 3. And we go in my associate doctor series how to interview and find all this information. And then the emotional connection, political affiliation. Mainly when I talk about political affiliation, I'm talking about money hangups. Okay. Some secondary factors are gender. And there's pros and cons to every one of these. It's not like they're all good or they're all bad. But we need to know how to put them in their respective place to increase the possibility of a successful associate doctor relationship. So you have gender benefits. When we talk about benefits, this is pretty much the basic 7. That there's the salary, the bonus, health insurance, retirement, vacation, malpractice insurance, continuing education. Those are the common ones. There could be some other ones depending on the business model that you're dealing with again. So we already talked about gender and age. Age is definitely a factor. Distance that they live from office, full-time versus part-time, and do they have the resources to open an office? These are major considerations, okay? And then we'll pay attention to some clinical factors like the treatment technique, treatment philosophy, equipment needed. As long as it's not too far off. And again, I go into great detail and all this stuff in the Associate Doctor Training Series, okay? So having said that, but what I'm trying to just point out here is every one of these factors will determine whether or not they're in one of these types of associate doctor business models. So the first, let me run through them and then we'll go through it. So the first one is the passive phlegmatic. That's one business model. The hybrid associate doctor is another. The alpha male clinic purchase, that's another. The part-time associate doctor, that's another one. The semi-retired associate doctor or the clinic purchase doctor or the personal injury satellite office doctor. These are all different types of associate doctors. And which one you will pick will be, or that's optimal, will be based on essentially these factors right here. So we're going to pay a lot of attention to this because it's going to increase or decrease the likelihood of any one of these being successful. Again, and I go into detail of how they all match up in great detail separately in my associate doctor video training series. Okay. So basically, when you talk about the passive phlegmatic, you're talking about that's typically the good long-term relationship. Now, this is only good when you know how to create more patients than you can handle. These people are they're easy to get along with. They're typically everybody likes. They're reliable. Salary is more important than bonus. Now, this is why it's so important, because this will be a totally different associate doctor contract than these other, because the salary is more important than these other benefits. They've got low confrontation. They cannot close patients. They cannot get new patients. So you cannot expect this person to learn how to get new patients. You cannot expect them to learn how to get prepays. That is not what this person will be able to do. it's totally counter to their natural personality of confrontation. So you've already set yourself up to lose if that's what you've done. Either never practice. A good one is the ones that either have never practiced or failed, especially if they've already failed, because they want nothing to do with that misery again. So this typical associate doctor is usually the first one that I suggest you go after and get, especially for the doctors that know how to get more new patients than they know how to handle. In other words, they just need somebody to process patients. Well, this is it right here. This is the reliable doctor that will stay forever if it fits these parameters, the passive phlegmatic with some of these other major factors that we itemized earlier. Number 2 is the hybrid associate doctor. So the hybrid associate doctor you'll be able to train. Now that's a combination of personalities. In other words, there'll be what's called primary or secondary melancholy or choleric. Those are the 2 most important personality traits to be self-employed. They have the natural ability to do what it takes to be self-employed. That's why. Okay, so you got the hybrid associate doctor. This one you'll be able to train. You'll be able to train them to get new patients, close patients, but they'll leave after training if it's not fee-based or there's better terms to stay. So if you're not charging them for the experience and they get credit for their production with their productivity, or it's better for them to stay than to leave. And a lot of times that's the way we make it. Now, in the beginning, it's not that way because we expect to make our money back and more. But after we've made X amount of money back and more, then we can always make it better for an associate doctor to stay than to leave when we look at all the factors. Okay, so, but that's what you have to do to keep them. It's a good type to sell off an office to. If you wanted to sell off an office, that's a good type. Now, this type is based on motivation. So this would be a lower salary. The passive phlegmatic, it's all about salary. It's not about bonus and incentives. The hybrid associate doctor is definitely about incentives. So this one will start very low with a base salary, and everything will be tied into productivity, and that's what they want. So you can start with a lower side. We'll stay longer with a higher percentage, with higher productivity. So after we make X amount of money back, I mean, would I be willing to give an associate doctor 60 or 70% if they were seeing over 200 visits a week? Yeah, I would. Because I'd rather have 30% of 200 visits a week than 100% of nothing. Because that's a lot of money. And that person's never going to, or not never, but very rarely, because they're not going to get 60 or 70% on their own. And they're going to do a lot more work and lose a lot more benefits. So you can convert to subcontractor, and that's what we like to do a lot of times. They'll initially be associate doctor. And then once we make X amount of money back, then we'll just flip them into a subcontractor where now they're responsible for everything. And we'll take a percentage and make it worth their while to stay. That's what works real well. There will be an increase. They will be successful on their own once trained. That's what I say about these doctors. Once they're trained, these are the kind of doctors that'll be successful, but they'll be way more successful when we train them. So you just want to get in the middle of that, train them, and take essentially a piece of the pie for helping them to be way more successful the rest of their life. Advertising will only attract a few. Advertising is what gets most of the passive phlegmatic doctors because they can't do it on their own. So there's a lot more passive phlegmatic doctors out there. But if you don't know how to create more new patients or keep them, then this is a bad situation. Now you got the blind leading to blind. Okay, so you got advertising. You won't get a lot of hybrid doctors with advertising. You will every now and then, though. But that's not where most of them will come from. And I would say the best place to get associate doctors is go to the school and actually talk to do a talk at one of the local fraternities off campus. When you try to get involved with school, that's a huge bureaucracy. So the best way is to is to do it off campus and in one of the fraternities, something like that. Alpha male, and I have a sales course on how to sell associate doctors, but again, I'm not getting into that right now. All right, alpha male clinic purchase. This is the easiest money you'll make. This is the doctor that once you train, so it's best to train to sell an office to. It's the easiest money. They're going to succeed. They will be able to close and get new patients. Don't think they need you. Advertising usually doesn't work any myself. These types of doctors are the doctors who are going to do it on their own with or without you. Obviously, your training will elevate them way better than what they will do on their own. But these are the doctors that are going to succeed. So you just want to get in the middle. Now, the problem is they don't think they need you. So you almost always have to be able to sell these doctors. You have to know the sales presentation to get these doctors. They're not looking in the ads for associates typically. That's pretty rare. So just be aware of that. And by the way, they won't stay as associates. They won't stay. These are the guys that they just wanted the information and to move on. See, when I identify this type of person, I'm just going to train them, charge them to train them, and charge them for the office. We're going to use the money that they create in training to open their office, pre-sell the office, take a percentage of their gross collections as the payment that's going toward the payment for the purchase of the office, just like you do with a mortgage on a house. This is the easiest money you'll make, is this one. But you do have to know sales to get this one. Okay. Part-time associate doctor. This is an easy step to grow without the higher cost. You want a spouse to make a good income. You do not want the primary breadwinner, salary only, no benefits. So let me expand on that a little bit. Generally, you don't want to go right to an associate doctor. The only reason you would do that, or a part-time doctor. The only reason you would do that is if you didn't have a lot of volume and you needed to, because let's say you were injured or you had an injury and you just can't work full time. This is a common scenario for that, is you can bring in the part-time associate doctor and then you significantly decrease your load. So you might be able to significantly decrease your load very minimally, and then they would treat the majority of the patients. But you would still be doing all the closing and all that, the marketing and all that. They wouldn't be doing that. They would just be there to process patients. That's it. And really just to physically take the load off you. That's it. Well, the reason we do part-time is it doesn't cost as much. You don't have to pay the full salary. You don't have to pay all the benefits. It's just it's a much smaller salary. And then you would just pay essentially the malpractice insurance, essentially. So this is a stair step is what it is. And sometimes they'll say, well, you might do the part-time associate doctor. And then when you hire the next associate doctor, make sure it's a full-time. Okay. So this is a stepping stone is what this is. And you can see all of these are different contracts. They do not have the same benefits and the same responsibilities. They don't. Okay, semi-retired associate. This one's totally different. This is when you take a doctor who is essentially semi-retired, like working 3 days a week, an older guy has been in practice 30, 40 years. And basically we sell them to come into our office and we give them one room to work out of. And we take, 40 or 50%. Well, immediately their income goes up because they're paying overhead from day one, from the first visit. So they don't even make profit until after 20 or 30 visits. Usually these doctors are only seeing like 60 or 80 visits a week. So a good chunk of their patient visits is going to overhead. Well, if they're seeing 60, 80 visits a week, as soon as they come into your office, they just made 50% of the first 20 visits. Their income just went up. Plus, there's a lot of other benefits. So it's good for new patient overflow. It's good for vacations, time off. You don't have to pay a salary to this guy at all. He's already got his business. He's just moving it into your office, and he's on the way out. He's not trying to build his office and all that. They get a percentage of their production. They have their own passive referrals. That's a key. We always want to make sure that they have at least 8 passive referrals a month. That's a key. We can't have somebody who's not getting business, failing, and then come into your office and then suck off you, especially if you don't know how to get patients or keep them. Now you got a nightmare on your hands. Unfortunately, that's what a lot of chiropractors do. They don't know how to get or keep patients. So to help offset their overhead, they try to bring somebody else in to offset their overhead, and the person they bring in typically doesn't know either. And that's a real bad situation. Okay, so this works well. We've done this with a couple doctors, and they've increased their income, their passive income, $150,000 a month, just from bringing in the semi-retired associate doctor and giving him 50%. He's already made more than he's going to, has a lot less responsibility. He's got a lot more flexibility. He can even take time off and still get paid. You treat his patients for a small percentage. This is a great situation for the semi-retired doctor on the way out and a doctor that just wants, it's essentially you're bringing in a sub business is what it is. And then we usually help them a little bit with, because usually they're not good with patient education. So we'll give them a few pointers and this and that. Usually they clean up and even do better. So this is a potentially very good situation for an extra $150,000 in passive income with no responsibility. You didn't have to pay for it. It's just him moving his office into yours. So obviously we go into detail, in my other webinar series, on my training, associate doctor training series, of all the details of all this. But you can see this is a totally different contract. We got different terms, we got different responsibilities, we've got different benefits. All of these up to this point are totally different. There's no generic. Now, individually, they're the same. If I were to do 2 or more semi-retired doctors or 2 or more part, then I wouldn't want to do that. So it would be a similar type of contract. You'd still have to change a little bit the benefits or the responsibilities a little bit. Clinic purchase doctor, hybrid associate doctor to open their office. This is the doctor where the whole agreement is them come in an associate for a certain amount of time or money, and we train them how to do everything. With the agreement, they pre-purchase an office. See, this works out well because essentially it's like a internship. They're essentially, it's a great step to being successful, to coming out of school, not having any finances or knowledge of how to open and run a successful practice, to getting the finances, and the knowledge and the skill, and then moving into their own practice. Well, see, this is already preset, and it has to be preset. You can't train the person and then expect them to buy an office from you 2 years later. Well, they already know how to do it. There's no reason for them to buy it now. So this is a hybrid associate doctor to open, good for opening multiple offices in the same county or the next county, because it's easier to access. It's easier to train. It's easier. And another thing we'll do sometimes is we'll even include them in the basics of our marketing and billing program for a small percentage of their gross collections, or that might be part of the deal, see? And then we can market together. So this is another way to be representative with multiple offices in a county, but still be uniform. See, still do the same procedures and all that kind of stuff, which is what everybody wants, especially if you're dealing with personal injury attorneys. They don't want 10 different offices doing 10 different things. So this is a great way. This is the model that I used when I had 9 offices in my major city. They came in as associate doctors, trained. I made X amount of money, and the whole agreement was to move them and open them. Well, I essentially used the money that they used in training to open them, but now it was very inexpensive because they knew what they were doing. And they basically became successful immediately because they knew we trained them how to get new patients and keep them and all that. And then they had the total support. And so, we even met once a week. It was very easy for everybody in the same county to get together once a week for, to go over what we're doing as a group. So this is what this model, that's a very different model, see? And then, of course, there's the personal injury satellite office. And that's this is the only practice model that you can own. Now, in this one, you definitely want a passive phlegmatic. That's the person that will stay. But we only open these offices where we've already sold the attorneys and their referring business, and yet they have overflow of PI cases in other cities that are too far to come to us. That's the only way we open an office there. Now, when we do, it's immediately profitable, or we never would have opened an office there if we didn't have 2 or 3 attorneys saying, yeah, we have 2, 3, or 4 or 5, cases a month in that city. Or we wouldn't open it. But that's how we easily open a second office and how it's quickly profitable. Now, in that one, we definitely want a passive phlegmatic doctor. That's the one we want somebody that's going to stay and just process the business. That's it. Now, if we do that, we have to have a strong office manager. So you cannot have a passive phlegmatic sanguine office manager. So you have somebody in there's got to be strong. And then we keep away, we don't let them talk with the attorneys. We keep those connections to the minimum. And this is base salary. Again, the base salary is more important than the bonus. The benefits are more important than the salary. Stability is real important to the passive phlegmatics. And they just follow a checklist. So they've learned the documentation. They come in our office and learn the documentation for about 3 months and the narrative report, and they follow the checklist. So they're well trained by the time they leave. We open the office and immediately it's successful. That's what we do with our personal injury offices. That's how we just go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 offices, just like that. These are all different. Every one of these business models are different. And these are the factors that'll determine it, whether it's the top 5 factors, the secondary factors, or the clinical factors. That's depending on which one you have, depends on which one will be the best opportunity. And some of them will just be flat out like oil and water. You don't want to mix them at all. Like there's no way I'm hiring an alpha male to come in to a business model for the passive phlegmatic associate doctor. That's oil and water. It will not mix. It will not. Or try to bring in a passive phlegmatic and try to make him like a hybrid doctor that actually we train how to get new patients and how to do prepays and close. It's oil and water. It will not work. You're setting yourself up for failure. So it's important to understand these differences depending on the business model. And that's what will determine the contract. So now let's go into what are the basic components of the contract. Okay. So when we look at the components of the contract, essentially it's who are the parties involved? Number 1, that's pretty easy. Number 2 is what are the personal responsibilities of the parties? Number 3 are the benefits. Number 4 is if there's a breach in the office policy. And remember, this has to be in writing. Anything that's not in writing is not valid. It's not enforceable and it's not valid. So we want to make sure that they're exposed to the office manual, the office policies. We want to know that, in other words, they need to know what the rules and guidelines are. And we want them to sign off on it. And then there's typical legal jargon that you need to be aware of. And I'm going to cover that in just a second. They're just generic legal phrases. Like if part of the agreement is found null and void, it does not null and void the full contract. So that's a common legal jargon phrase. Okay. So there's several of them. I'll go into some of them here in just a second. And then you want to make sure you have your non-compete in there. That's real important. Now, remember, when we do non-competes, you never do a non-compete. There's a couple basic rules with that. Number 1 is you never go too far because they'll rule it down. I've had doctors that try to do a 25-mile radius, and I'm like, no, it's going to get overruled. Now, they won't totally vacate it, but when it's challenged, it'll go, well, that's ridiculous. They'll bring in a professional like me, and they'll say, hey, what would be the the normal radius clause for this office. And I'll do the geographic radius of draw and psychographic barriers, and then I'll show it to them. And that's what the judge will typically use. So you always want to start at that point. So the geographic radius of draw is dependent on one of three factors. It's a lot smaller if you're an inner city office, because you'll get 80% of your business from 1 mile. And if you're in a suburb, you'll get 80% from 2.5, no more than 3 miles. And if you're in a rural county, it'll be 7 miles. So the geographic radius of draw will be different depending on what type of practice you're in and your psychographic barriers. See, so those will be different. And then the other thing is, when it's violated, you want to put a flat fee. You do not want to leave it open-ended where it's just a non-compete, and then you got to sue, then you got to sue for damages and find out what they are. You'll never be able to prove damages. All the damages. And then you'll be in a lawsuit for 2 years. It'll cost you $20,000, $30,000, and you're going to end up settling out of court anyway. So I just put in a flat $100,000. They violated it. They treat one person in that geographic radius of draw. It's a $100,000 fine. See, I don't have to go to court. I mean, I don't have to prove anything. The only thing I have to prove is they signed it and read it. That's it. It's done. I don't have to prove that there was $100,000 in damages, and there doesn't have to be $100,000 in damages. And nowadays, I tell you what, I'd even take it up to $250,000. And the bottom line is, if the person has no intentions on violating the no compete and it's reasonable, they should sign it. It shouldn't be a big deal. I'd have no problem signing a $250,000 no compete if it was in 3 miles of a suburb or 5 miles of a suburb office for 5 years. Same with time frame. You want to put in a time frame. Minimum's 2 years, but you'd like to have 5. And so it depends on your geographic radius of draw, psychographic barriers, and time frame. So anyway, we just put a fixed amount in that it's automatic. There's just an automatic fine if they treat a patient within those boundaries. I don't have to prove all that. I don't have to prove all that damage. And if I had no counter intentions, that I wasn't going to open, in 6 months, a year, or whatever, within 3 miles, I'd have no problem signing it, because you're not on the hook for anything. If you have no counter intentions, you're not on the hook for anything. There's no reason not to sign it. There's no reason not to sign $1 billion. Okay. All right. But it's got to be reasonable. And then, of course, you got to sign it. And there's another component that you need to be aware of, is you want the other party to have legal counsel on the contract, because that's a common way that people try to get out of it, is they'll say, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't talk to an attorney. Okay. So you always want to make sure that whoever you're dealing with, that they have them sign off on it. So I had my doctors were required, and what they do is they just hire like an hour or 2 hours of the attorney's time. That's how it works. They just call a business attorney and ask to pay for 1 or 2 hours of time. They usually charge you like 2 hours. And then tell them what you want. So I'd like you to look at this contract and then tell me the pros and cons on it. That's it. And then they have to sign off that the attorney did review that contract with them. In other words, I want it legally in my hand that they had legal counsel with a legal instrument. That just makes it that much more secure and safe and all that kind of stuff. There's different levels of security with contracts. So, and then I want a notary. I want it notarized. But those are some of the key things. And if I was actually charging a specific amount, then I'd want not just a contract, I want a promissory note. And that's if you're charging a certain amount to train them and keep them there, and you take a percentage of their production, and it offsets the amount that you agreed to charge them. So let's say you'll bring them in and you'll charge $200,000, and the percent that goes towards you is credited against the $200,000. And when that's over, you renegotiate or they go their own way, that kind of thing. There's a lot more to it, but that's the short of it. Okay. So that's how that works. And so we would want a promissory note in addition to the agreement. And the main reason for that, it's a lot less trouble legally. With a contract, you got to go through court. It's going to take years. It's going to cost a lot of money. With a promissory note, it's not that way. You just show up and they go, no, they agreed to pay this amount of money, period. And you just show up and they just verify it was the person's signature, especially if they had legal counsel, then it's like, okay, well, you owe the money, now it's time to pay. So that's the difference with a promissory note. And we want both. Again, but you're only going to do a promissory note if you're going to actually charge. Okay.